It is time for another Georgia Bulldogs baseball update. We've got Dogs 24/7's Olivia Sayer on to talk about the 8-1 Georgia Bulldogs. Another successful week for the Bulldogs, taking care of Kennesaw State, UIC. Olivia, hope things are going well, and just get your general thoughts on where this team is right now. 8-1, and another successful week in the books.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hope everything's going well with you as well. I think you're never going to complain about an 8-1 start, first of all. I definitely think if you would have asked Wes Johnson at the start of the year, what are your thoughts on starting 8-1? Nothing to complain about, especially considering how many of those were on the road. As far as general thoughts about the team, I think you saw a little bit of change in its offensive approach this past weekend, which obviously scored a lot or led to a lot of runs being scored. So I think this team's definitely headed in the right direction.
So let's go back to last week with a game that I think got some folks' attention, even outside of Georgia baseball, sort of that Georgia circle, with the Kennesaw State game. A little bit chippier than I guess. Maybe I missed the memo on that one. But what did you think of how that game played out, and what did you think of Brian Curley going out there and shutting the door on the Owls?
Yeah, so I would definitely agree. Chippy was 100% the right way to describe it. And it wasn't even the stuff with Curly, it wasn't even the stuff with Wes. Just all game back and forth, both dugouts were kind of going at each other. You saw it after Slate hit that home run. He kind of jawed at the pitcher jawed back. I don't know if it was an in state rivalry thing. I don't know if it was just a weekend thing. Wes Johnson actually mentioned that he had that game circled on Georgia's calendar at the start of the season. So going into it, he knew it was going to be a big deal for Kennesaw State. But definitely good to get out of there with a win, especially you look at the way Georgia came by that win with the comeback victory. They've been facing a little bit of adversity this season, which is definitely going to help it in the postseason. And as far as Brian Curley, I think not really more that you can ask for him. He's definitely a very interesting character. He's confident. He said it doesn't really come from a place of cockiness, but more so internal confidence, as in, hey, if I don't go out there and I don't believe I can do it, then why am I even pitching? You got to go out there, you got to believe. And another thing I thought that's really interesting about Curly is he said when he's on the mound, it's a me versus me approach. It's not him versus the batter. All he's focused on is executing those pitches to the spot where Wes calls it, where Henry Hunter calls it behind the plate. And I think you saw that pay off for him, especially against Kennesaw State. And it's been fun to see him go a little viral from it.
Yeah, you see, I have to imagine Brian Curley's becoming a fan favorite very quickly. So, Olivia, 8-1 so far. Georgia's rising up the rankings as non-conference play continues. What do you feel like you've learned about this team through 9 games? Has anything in particular really stood out to you?
Yeah, I mentioned it in the beginning, but the offensive approach really stands out for me. I think opening weekend, I don't know if it was just the wind blowing in, which apparently in North Carolina, it's right on the beach, so it's brutal. I don't know if it was the ballpark, maybe just opening day, opening weekend jitters, all the new guys trying to do too much, but during that game, it felt like, or during that series rather, it felt like Georgia was kind of trying to hit the perennial 7-run home run, which obviously is impossible. Felt like they were trying to play hero ball. They were trying to hit a home run every single at bat rather than just take what the other team was giving it. And I think you saw that approach really change against UIC this past weekend. They were taking their walks, taking their singles. I don't remember the exact number, but they have a lot of walks through 9 games so far, which is a stat that they excelled in last year. They're getting hit by pitches. And Wes Johnson even mentioned it, that they're staying to their approach, but they're shortening it a little bit, not trying to do too much.
To this point in the year, who are some of the hitters that have really impressed you? Who has kind of stood out in that department?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a lot of new guys. Rylan Zebrowski was really impressive this past weekend. Kind of looked like Charlie Condon in the box, especially on that grand slam swing. Big righty there. Another guy, Robbie Burnett. Robbie Burnett can do it all. He's not just a power hitter. He steals bases. He's athletic on the base paths. Really good defense. But the guy that really stood out to me is a guy that actually returned, which is Slate Alford. And he's a guy, I think if you were to ask the people within the program, I think they thought he would have been gone after last season, did not get drafted, did have an opportunity to go play, signed with some teams in free agency, but he opted to come back to Georgia, mainly because he said MLB scouts wanted to see an improvement on his defensive ability and his speed. And so he trimmed down a little bit, I think about 20 pounds from last season, and you've really seen the effects of that. He started off the first game against UIC 4 for 4, was a homer away from the cycle. Also playing really solid defense. He hit a triple, scored from first on a double from someone else. So I think he's a guy that's really just shown improvement so far this season. And if he gets hot, watch out because this Georgia team's going to go with him.
You talked about the walks. Georgia already with 64 walks on the season, so they are showing a really good patient approach at the plate. Looking at the pitching, Olivia, who has stood out on that front? Who do you think has impressed to this point in the season?
Yeah, so one quick note on the walks. They've also gotten hit by a lot of pitches, and my favorite thing I learned about this team last year is they actually practice that in practice. They have the coaches throw like rag balls at him, and they have to stand there and take it. So I always love that stat. But as far as pitching, a couple of guys that have stood out to me, obviously Brian Curley, and then I think Leighton Finley's come back and done solid what we expect him to do. My main concern on the pitching front is who's going to start for this team. And to be fair, to play devil's advocate a little bit, injuries have played a big role in it. You look, Colton Smith's recovering from those back spasms, started against Kennesaw State, got hit around a little bit. Charlie Goldstein's still getting built up, but he's looked really good in his 2 performances so far. But aside from that, they've tried to start Brian Zeldin twice. I personally don't think Brian Zeldin's a starter. I think you saw that given that UIC hit him the second time through the lineup, which, as you know, in a reliever role, that typically doesn't happen, which is where he was comfortable last season. Zach Brown's another guy that has a lot of potential. They started him against UNC Wilmington. He got hit really bad, was throwing strikes but got hit. He came in and played against UIC, followed Goldstein a little bit, was solid, got a lot of strikeouts, but he's a guy that just needs to be confident on the mound. He has to calm those nerves. And if he can, then Georgia can definitely rely on him. But aside from that, you have your JT Quinn. You have a couple of other guys that are getting stretched out. But if Georgia wants to go deep this season, especially and do well during conference play, it needs to figure out who its starter is.
So you look ahead to the week ahead, Georgia State in the midweek, and then Georgia hosts Florida Gulf Coast. What are you watching for? What are you looking to learn from these upcoming games?
Yeah, I think what I just touched on, I want to see who's going to step up out of that bullpen and become a true Friday, Saturday, Sunday starter for Georgia. Because as you know, once conference play starts and you're facing all these elite teams, you look at what Tennessee did this past week, and I think it was 24 runs. Oklahoma had an insane week in offensively. You need someone to step up and be that. I think Leighton Finley is going to be that Friday night. I think Colton Smith's going to come back and be that Saturday, and maybe Charlie Goldstein as well. But aside from that, who's going to be your game 3 starter once conference play starts? And early in the season, this non-conference slate is the perfect time to figure that out.
Olivia, I appreciate you popping on as always. I want to give you the opportunity to plug anything on social media, anything you're working on. Let the folks know where they can follow your coverage.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Olivia K. Sayer. And then I'm working on a couple of interesting, exciting stories. I'm going to do something on Slate, just his performance this past weekend, that chip on his shoulder that he's coming back with. And then I'm also working on a piece explaining Dylan Goldstein's lawsuit against the NCAA. He has, I believe it's a hearing for a preliminary injunction on Tuesday at 5 p.m. So going to explain that a little bit, where it stems from. I believe he submitted a waiver in January that I'll get into. And if he can come back, that would be another huge addition for Georgia. So those are a couple of the things I'm working on. But yeah, excited to see how all that turns out.
Never a dull moment around Georgia baseball. Olivia, thanks so much and keep up the good work.